1942 came with a number of unique challenges for the Allies. The Royal Navy found itself with a number of good escort designs, but nowhere near enough production capacity to build them in the quantity they needed. The US Navy, on the other hand, had plenty of theoretical production capacity, but being newly thrust into the war was lacking in modern small ships designs for use as escorts. And the U-boats weren't about to wait for either side to work out their issues. The solution that was worked out was to take a couple of River-class frigates, a relatively recent design that had just started production over in the UK and were also being built in Canada, and to transfer 2 units over to the US Navy in a half-finished state, which would allow the US production industry to use them as references for their own version. This version would become the Tacoma class. Whilst allies, the Royal Navy and the US Navy had different equipment and operational requirements from their ships. Thus, elements of these 2 sample ships were reconfigured to allow a kind of modular design, which could be assembled much more rapidly than putting together the whole ship from individual parts in a single location and as a single project. The Rivers also used the standard British lightweight naval gun for small escort ships, the 4-inch. But the US Navy hadn't installed a 4-inch gun on new ships since the Wickes and Clemson classes 2 decades previously. The 5-inch was in high demand elsewhere, and in any case would take up a little bit too much weight and space on the small vessels. Whilst the Tacomas were about the same displacement as some pre-war destroyers that did have 5-inch guns, they had far more space devoted to anti-submarine warfare and anti-aircraft equipment than those older ships, a number of which had proved to be somewhat overloaded in any case. Thus, the only other US gun in the inventory with mass availability was the 3-inch, and the ships were thus duly equipped. This allowed for the main armament to be increased to a total of 3 single 3-inch guns, along with an anti-aircraft armament of 4 40mm Bofors in twin mounts, 9 single 20mm Oerlikons, and an all-round anti-submarine warfare armament, consisting of 2 depth-charge rails launching off the back, 8 depth-charge launchers that primarily allowed for sideways launching, and a Hedgehog projector for forward work. A pair of vertical triple expansion engines generated 5,500 indicated horsepower, and this managed to get the ships up to just over 20 knots. Relatively slow for a 1930s and 1940s era warship, but more than fast enough to keep up with even the fastest of the large convoys, and it was still somewhat faster than earlier corvettes had been, which extended the range at which they could operate against submarines that had tried to attack the merchant ships but had been driven off. However, a range of production quality issues delayed the ship's entry into service, by which point they were competing with US-built destroyer escorts, which the US Navy preferred for a number of reasons, including more comfort in tropical environments and stronger hulls, as the destroyer escorts were generally being built to military specs, whereas the Rivers were successors to the Flower-class corvettes, and thus the Tacoma class were actually built to merchant standards. Although, with that said, the quality of the ships also varied quite considerably depending on their yard of origin. As a result, when they entered service, they came into an environment where the Kriegsmarine's submarine force was already on the back foot, as was the Japanese Navy's subforce, and there were significant numbers of destroyer escorts and other further improved frigate designs already in service. Thus, most of the Tacomas were moved almost immediately into second-line roles, crewed by US Coast Guard men instead of US Navy sailors, operating as training ships, escorting convoys somewhat closer to the continental United States, being used for weather monitoring, and in the case of just under 2 dozen, being temporarily transferred to the Royal Navy. Another batch were transferred to the USSR right at the end of the war to help bulk up the Soviet Pacific Fleet so that the Russians could help with the anticipated invasion of Japan. Post-war, most of the ships would either be decommissioned or sold off to a wide variety of customers, both for use in foreign navies and conversion to civilian use, the latter of which they were especially suited for thanks to their mercantile origins, although a few would briefly return to service during the Korean War. For a relatively unloved class of ships when it came to the attitude of their builders, the Tacomas proved surprisingly long-lived, with foreign navies who bought them often keeping them around in one form or another for 2 to 3 decades after the end of World War II, with 2 particular ships, in service with the Thai Navy, just about making it over the line into the 21st century, the ex-USS Glendale and the ex-USS Gallop, the latter of which is still around as a museum ship.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.